Max, Keiser, first to you. This has been asked time and again. Anti-austerity protests, however, turning very violent in Greece, as we witnessed today. Protesters and police clashing on the streets of Athens as the country is struggling to save its economy. Is a Greek default inevitable? And what does that mean for the Eurozone if it does indeed default on its debt?
Well, it's in the best interest of Greek sovereignty for them to default. The Greek people know that they are struggling and fighting for their sovereignty, that bankers from outside the country want to steal their assets. They want to steal the new gold mining operations that have recently been talked about as going to be exploited. And this is really an echo from what we're seeing Occupy Wall Street and Occupy London. As you know, the global insurrection against banker occupation started in Tunis, then it went to Cairo, then we saw in Spain and Athens, then it went over to New York, and now it's going to shift back in a big way to Athens. And hopefully Athens, through this strike, can collapse the banking system. That's the goal. It's in their best interest. It's in the world's best interest. Hopefully they'll be successful.
Sean O'Grady, I saw a reaction from you on your face. I'm not too sure what it was, but tell us what you think about what Max said. I think there's a few points there that I think you have a reaction on.
Yes, well, I think it's extraordinary that anyone can think that collapsing the world's banking system is the best thing that can possibly happen. The problems in the banking system, however they came to be, are why we are in the mess that we're in today. And I'm afraid we just have to face up to that. It's not because of some sinister plot or capitalism or something like that. It's simply because the Greek nation as a whole, especially the public sector, borrowed way beyond its means. It was allowed to do so. It could do so in the Eurozone because it was part of a stable currency bloc, but it was not a rational or a sane or a prudent course for the Greek government to undertake, to run up debts nearly 3 times the size of their economy. Now they're unable to pay them. In fact, we've had a sort of default some months ago already. The Greek government has had to arrange with the banks that they take a little bit less than they should have under the letter of the agreements when they lent money to the Greek government. And we may well see more of that. But it's no one interest to see Greece or pull down the banking system or pull down the euro or anything like that. The Greeks have really got to face up to the fact that they simply live beyond their means, and no amount of rioting can really negate that. That is a matter of historic fact.
When we look down the list of some of these U.S.-based companies that have branches worldwide, we can mention financial institutions like Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, to arms manufacturers, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, not to mention petroleum companies, ExxonMobil, profits in the billions, and it is said that they control a large portion of the money supply. How come it is, not only in the U.S. but worldwide, that this money doesn't reach the people? After all, these were some of the companies that were bailed out, and now they're obviously in the positive.
Well, first I want to go back and revisit the comment pertaining to whether or not Greece's problems were the result of a sinister bank plot or not. Let's go back to the creation of the euro. We now know that Goldman Sachs was involved in a sinister plot, if you want to call it sinister. I just call it outright fraud, of hiding Greek debt. And since the creation of the euro, Goldman Sachs, we now know, has made repeated bets against the Greek economy through credit default swaps. There's a meeting with Lloyd Blankfein and John Paulson, a noted hedge fund manager in Athens a couple of years ago. The sole purpose of that meeting was how to destroy the Greek economy using credit default swaps and other highly leveraged derivative products. So yes, it is a sinister plot, and it is in the Greeks' best interest to get rid of those bankers who are with Papandreou committing massive fraud. And I don't use that term lightly or in any way other than what the legal definition of fraud is. They were induced and tricked into massive debt and accounting fraud. Now, just in the past week, Bank of New York caught with a $300 billion pension scam. Wachovia Wells Fargo recently caught in a $400 billion Mexican drug laundering scam. Bank of America, just in the last 2 days, caught trying to move more than trillions in debts from Merrill Lynch to the public federal balance sheet. And of course, just in the last couple of days, the Supreme Court in America is saying that the Mirrors foreclosure scandal is okay by them, even though it's a $400 billion fraud. So yes, we have to collapse the banks. We have to go after the banks the same way we go after terrorists in these other countries. These other terrorists are targeted for assassination by Obama, and yet he lets terrorists like Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon go scot-free. That's a double standard. The people in Greece are right to revolt, as John Locke said in 1793. If the social contract is broken, the people must revolt. That's the point we're at now. By being an apologist for the bank, you're setting yourself up to be, you're like putting a giant bullseye on your back, which you're happy to do, and you're happy to do that, sir, but don't blame us when that day of reckoning comes.
Sean O'Grady.
Well, I mean, I don't recognize any of that at all. If Goldman Sachs and other institutions advised the Greek government when they were trying to join the euro to fiddle the figures, if you will, that was at the behest of the Greek government, not at the behest of Goldman Sachs. That's the first thing. The second thing is on the credit default swap deals and so on. For decades, especially in the UK, we know about this with the pound sterling, for decades banks have betted against governments that have tried to sustain unsustainable exchange rates and unsustainable exchange rate regimes like the euro in the case of Greece. That's nothing unusual and nothing in its way all that sinister. It's not the fault of banks, it's the fault of governments for putting themselves up for a fall. And the sooner governments get used to the idea
let me just cut in right there for a second, if I might.
Every country is a better idea.
Let me just make a comment.
That's a good idea as well. And the Greek banking system.
Okay, Sean O'Grady, let Max talk. Continue with your thoughts after Max.
The Greek banking system is not the problem. The Greek banking system is not the problem. The Greek problem is pure and simple that they live beyond their means. They racked up enormous debts. And they didn't have huge investment bank difficulties in Greece or anything like that. The problem the Greek banks have got, and the other European banks, the French banks that have an interest in them, and the Germans and so on, is that they own far too much Greek government debt, Greek government bonds, which are now going to be devalued because the Greek government and the European authorities mismanaged things for the last 10 years.
Great. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, the argument that the Greek government asked Goldman Sachs to rape them, I'm sure that if this gentleman's wife was unmercifully raped in the street, that he would say, yes, she asked for it.
They're not terrorists.
And I'm sure that would go over well with your wife. Now, the fact is that when you come into the marketplace, as Goldman Sachs did, selling products that now are known to be weapons of mass financial destruction, as even Warren Buffett calls them, and are using virtually unlimited credit lines to do so against a country that you're not being fully disclosed with. You're not telling them exactly the risks of these products that you're selling these companies. It's mis-selling. It's fraud. So to say that, well, they asked for it, I wouldn't want to be married to you, sir, or be one of your daughters in a case of a rape case. That's all I can say. But you'll have to deal with that with your own family. Again, putting a target on your back. I mean, this is where we're at now. People who want to side with the bankers are doing so willfully, and the consequences will be dealt with accordingly. Those who want to take down these terrorists are doing hard work. That's a global effort to do so, and they're doing what Lloyd Blankfein thinks he's doing. He says he's doing God's work. I think that, if anything, the folks who are fighting these terrorists are on the side of righteousness, and we'll see. This is a grand battle that's taking place. We'll see who wins at the end.
Terrorists.
I've got my bets on the global insurrection.
Let's go back to the banks. It seems like banks obviously are the focus here, and in no defense of Max Keiser, but again, one of the things that is bone of contention, more than a quarter of top banks that has come out in the news plan to further raise salaries in the coming year on top of the hefty increases which followed the introduction of these new pay rules. An industry lobby group survey of 51 of the world's leading banks showed in the last 12 months fixed salaries increased at about 60% of the lenders. I mean, this is what the people are saying, the 1%. I mean, how is it that the banks can continue to do this? And ultimately, why is it that the people on the ground are not feeling the corporations, the financial institutions that were bailed out, who are now making profits, they're not feeling it on the ground in terms of any area of their life practically? Maybe you could shed more light on it.
Well, I mean, it's a long story. The banks all around the world, the Western banks, are in a very, very bad state. Part of the reason they got themselves into that state wasn't so much that the bankers paid themselves enormous amounts of money, which they did, is because they took enormous risks, and they were incentivized to take too many risks by some of those enormous amounts of money. So it was the structure and the way in which they were rewarded, perhaps more than the level at which they were rewarded, that was at fault. There was a problem in the world with the way in which we created credit and the way in which the banks were able to create credit. But underlying that was a much more fundamental problem that we still have now, which we call the global imbalances, and the huge amounts of money that were flowing into the United States, into Britain, Spain, Ireland, Australia, and other countries, fueling massive property bubbles. It's perfectly true. The banks got rich on it. The banks used the money. That money was coming from China. It was coming from the Far East. And it was coming from those countries because they were hoarding cash and they weren't spending that cash on Western imports from the West, from America and Europe into China at the same time as they were exporting vast amounts to America and Europe. So the Americans and the Europeans were running big deficits, especially the British and the Americans, and the Chinese were running enormous surpluses. And that is still going on right now. If you look at the news today, the Chinese economy has slowed down a bit, but not by very much. It's still growing at 9% or so a year. They've still got trillions and trillions of dollars in foreign exchange reserves, which they lend to us for us to try and to buy more Chinese goods and keep up our standard of living. This has got to be resolved. This is where the money problem started.
Okay, Max, if you had a position to pick, head of the IMF, if the Secretary Timothy Geithner's position, or European Central Bank, let's say, which one would you pick that would make a difference in a large way and have the deepest impact that perhaps all these economies can start seeing their people, average everyday people, reaping the rewards of it?
Well, I have to go back again and take exception with this character O'Grady's comment about banks taking risk. Banks taking risk, but not in their name. The banks did not take any risk to their balance sheet. The executives didn't take any risk to their salaries and bonuses. They took enormous risk in the name of the people that are now suffering the austerity measures. So to say that banks took risk is a misnomer. It's quite deceptive to say that. I think this guy O'Grady has Stockholm syndrome. He's being held hostage by these banking mentality, but he's fallen in love with his hostage takers. To say that these banks are taking risk is an enormous misrepresentation of the truth. Now, going forward, but again, lies are considered the currency of the banking system, so we can't blame O'Grady too much. He's simply using the currency of the banking industry, which is complete and utter bald-faced lies. But let's go forward. Who's the most to focus our attention on?
What about China? What about China?
That's preposterous to blame China.
What about?
If China were listening to the IMF, they wouldn't be growing. If they were listening to the European Union and the City of London banks, their economy would be shrinking like everybody else's. The fact is that they are expanding.
No, it wouldn't.
Let's see China raise the yuan. Let's see China raise the yuan so the cost of imports for the U.S. and the U.K. double in a space of 6 months. Let's see how that works out for them. To blame the sun.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, Max. I do apologize. We've ran out of time. We've got to put Max and Sean O'Grady on one program. Obviously, lots more to talk about, but that was Max Keiser, acting chief economist for Occupy London and broadcaster from Paris. Thank you.